Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a trade agreement that underpins, what, $1.6 trillion in annual commerce.
Trillion with a T.
Yeah, it's literally the foundation of the entire North American economy. And suddenly, it's on life support.
Mm.
And here is the truly staggering part. It's not being targeted by some distant rival.
Well,
It's being targeted by one of its own architects.
right.
We are diving deep today into this dramatic, accelerating crisis between the United States and Canada. A crisis driven really entirely by U.S. policies that have treated its closest ally more like an adversary.
And this isn't, a minor skirmish over lumber, dairy quotas. We've seen those before.
Right, this is different.
This is a profound, fundamental breakdown in trust. The consequences are measurable right now, not in some future projection, but in immediate economic damage.
So we're looking at a scenario where Canada is preparing, and meticulously, to walk away from the very trade deal, the USMCA, or COUMNI as it's known internationally.
The one Donald Trump negotiated and touted as one of his greatest accomplishments.
Exactly. And the clock is ticking. The deadline for renewal, for renegotiation, or, and this is the key part, outright withdrawal, is July 1st, 2026.
Which is less than 6 months away now. And Canada has spent the last year not trying to smooth things over, but strategically preparing for an exit.
So our mission today is to give you a true deep dive into the source material that defines this crisis.
Ah,
We're going to break down the immediate, shocking collapse in Canadian travel to the U.S.
that visible human sign that the trust is gone.
Yeah. We'll also dissect the comprehensive, calculated strategic plan that figures like Mark Carney have put into motion to decouple Canada from American market dependence.
And finally, we'll look at the incredible volume of dire warnings coming directly from the American economic base.
Yeah.
From farmers, from manufacturers, all of them begging the U.S. administration not to destroy this $1.6 trillion structure.
It's a powerful story of self-inflicted economic damage and just a massive strategic miscalculation. I find it so telling that the first measurable sign of damage appeared in tourism. Not in some complex trade data, but in people just deciding not to cross the border. It speaks to a collapse of personal trust, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's the most direct barometer you could ask for. The border crossing is the ultimate litmus test.
So what does the data actually show?
Well, the key data point is shocking because of how fast it happened. In February 2025, Canadian travel to the United States dropped by a stunning 40% compared to February 2024.
40%.
40.
That's not a gradual decline. That's a cliff. That's an instantaneous free fall.
It is. That kind of overnight collapse is what you see after something like 9/11 or a global pandemic, not between two of the most integrated allies in the world.
So what does that single-month plunge really suggest about Canadian sentiment?
It suggests an immediate, deep-seated resentment, a collective decision to just stop, to halt discretionary spending across the border.
And it wasn't just a blip.
No, not at all. Abacus Data did a poll in March 2025, just a month later, and it cemented the long-term intent. 62% of Canadians, almost two-thirds of the entire population, said they plan to actively avoid traveling to the U.S. for at least the next year.
Wow. So 6 months before this critical USMCA review, you have two-thirds of the Canadian populace actively voting against the U.S. economy with their wallets.
It's a massive, deliberate consumer action. It goes way beyond just political preference.
And the economic cost of that, it has to be significant, right?
Oh, it's staggering already. Industry analysts have run the numbers. This shift represents an estimated $4 billion annual loss to the American economy.
$4 billion. Now, that might sound small in the context of, a $25 trillion U.S. economy.
Right.
But you have to understand where that money is lost.
Exactly. It's not lost in Silicon Valley or on Wall Street. It's lost in small, vulnerable border communities.
Let's get specific on that. We're talking about American towns that really rely on Canadian shoppers, diners, vacationers.
Completely. Towns where Canadians cross the border for cheaper gas, for groceries, for a weekend shopping trip at a Target they don't have at home, when two-thirds of your main customer base just evaporates.
That town is in crisis.
A perfect and incredibly ironic case study is Haines, Alaska.
Haines, Alaska.
Yeah, the mayor there publicly warned that Trump's tariffs and his rhetoric were destroying the traditionally friendly relationship. And what makes this so important is that Haines is literally only connected to the rest of the U.S. road network through Canada.
So they are completely dependent on Canadian goodwill.
for their literal economic existence. And their own mayor is on the record criticizing the U.S. administration for policies that are strangling his town.
It's the ultimate paradox. U.S. policy designed to look tough is devastating the American businesses that depend on that cross-border cooperation.
And the reality in places like Haines or communities across Washington, Maine, upstate New York, it's profound economic stress. Empty hotels, restaurants closing, small businesses watching their revenue vanish because Canadians have just decided it's not worth the hassle.
And what really stands out to me in the source material is the warning that this loss isn't temporary. Analysts are calling it a permanent shift. This isn't just a diplomatic chill where business will snap back once the rhetoric changes. Why do they think this loss is structural?
That reasoning is really rooted in behavioral economics, in the psychology of habit.
Okay.
For decades, crossing the border for a weekend trip to Buffalo or Seattle was just an ingrained habit for millions of Canadians. And habits are hard to break, but once they're broken...
Are incredibly difficult to reform.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So once Canadians establish these new vacation patterns, choosing a European trip, exploring the Canadian Rockies, maybe heading to Mexico, they start building positive associations with those new routines.
So that first trip to Iceland, maybe motivated by avoiding the U.S. border, it becomes a great memory.
Right. They invest time, they invest money as a sort of sunk cost in these new destinations. And once that investment is made, the motivation to go back to the old, now politically charged routine, it just diminishes.
So even if the U.S. completely reverses course tomorrow, a huge chunk of that $4 billion a year is just gone. For good.
That's what the analysts are warning. It's structural and permanent. The trust broke and the routine followed, cementing a multi-billion-dollar hit. Which brings us to the critical question, right? What specific actions drove the world's most reliable ally to suddenly abandon decades of routine travel and start looking for long-term alternatives?
It wasn't just one thing, was it?
No, it was a sustained policy. It prioritized signaling domestic toughness over the stability of the relationship.
And the primary catalyst seems to be the sheer aggression and unpredictability of the Trump administration's posture. It didn't feel like negotiation, it felt hostile.
That's right. It manifested in two big ways. First was the economic threat, imposing those massive 25% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, even though USMCA was already in force.
Which is a clear breach of trust. It tells Canada that even an existing agreement offers you no protection.
It offers zero protection against arbitrary U.S. policy. And then the second part was the political rhetoric.
I mean, we're talking about publicly humiliating Canadian leaders, labeling Canada a national security threat, which is just absurd for a NATO ally.
And then there was the chilling threat, which he's repeated, to annex Canada as the 51st state.
And while that might sound like hyperbole to some people, in Ottawa, that signals a profound lack of respect for Canadian sovereignty. It set a really hostile stage.
It did. But the specific actionable policy that really crystallized this perception of Canada being treated as a security risk, not an ally, came on April 11th, 2025.
Tell us more about that specific policy, because this seems to be the one that turned Canadian annoyance into, genuine systemic avoidance.
This was the new security measure. It required that any Canadian citizen entering the United States for a stay longer than 30 days must register with authorities and be fingerprinted.
Let's just pause on that. The optics of that. We're talking about millions of Canadians who cross the border, often for routine business or extended family visits. And suddenly, if you plan to stay past a month, you're subjected to measures that are usually reserved for monitoring foreign nationals from, say, rival nations.
Or known criminal suspects. That's precisely the signal. You are treating the citizens of your largest trading partner, an ally that shares defense and intelligence, like potential criminals who need to be tracked and cataloged.
For a business traveler, this is more than an inconvenience. It's a deep insult.
It profoundly burdens their operations. I mean, think about Canadian executives who rely on programs like Nexus, which are designed to speed up trusted travelers.
Right.
How does a fingerprinting requirement impact, say, a manufacturing executive who needs to be at a new U.S. plant for 45 days to get it set up?
It completely undermines the trust inherent in a program like Nexus. It tells them they're not trusted for an extended period.
And it adds huge administrative complexity, delays, and political risk to cross-border operations. Why would a Canadian company keep its U.S. operations or use U.S. suppliers if every visit from its core staff is treated with suspicion?
The outcome is pretty predictable. Canadian businesses are now actively looking for alternatives. Instead of using a U.S.-based engineering firm and sending staff down for 6 weeks, they'll just choose a European consultant.
Or a domestic one. Anything to eliminate that friction.
And it extends to families, too. The family that used to spend their whole 6-week summer vacation visiting relatives in Florida, they now see that trip as burdened and humiliating.
So they're choosing European travel or just exploring Canada?
So a policy that was probably intended to look tough on the border for domestic political points has backfired spectacularly.
Completely. It hasn't improved security in any meaningful way, but it has fundamentally changed Canadian behavior and inflicted tangible structural economic damage on the very American communities that rely on that traffic.
Treating an ally like a security threat has a real-world cost.
Mm.
In this case, $4 billion that might never come back. So while the U.S. administration was focused on demanding fingerprints, Canada's leadership was executing this brilliant, calculated, comprehensive plan.
Mm.
This strategy, driven largely by Mark Carney, it's not about temporary retaliation, is it? It's about permanent economic survival.
That's the perfect way to put it. And you have to understand the architect here. Mark Carney isn't a typical politician. He was the governor of the Bank of Canada and, significantly, the governor of the Bank of England.
His credibility is global.
It is. And his approach is based on long-term risk management, not short-term political posturing.
Which makes sense. His strategy has been to proactively build economic partnerships that act as a systemic hedge against the unpredictable nature of U.S. trade policy.
The message is clear. If America insists on instability, Canada will find stability elsewhere.
And the first, most dramatic step was the European pivot.
This was a move of profound geopolitical significance. Carney secured Canada's entry into Europe's massive $244 billion safe defense program.
And this wasn't just about military contracts, though those are substantial.
Not at all. It was a massive symbolic and strategic move. By entering Europe's defense program, Canada immediately established itself as a trusted strategic partner to the EU.
At the exact moment when Europe was deeply questioning the long-term reliability of the U.S. as an ally.
Precisely. It was a clear signal that Canada is committed to multilateralism and stability, and that defense partnership was explicitly designed as a catalyst for much broader economic integration.
So we're talking about comprehensive energy partnerships,
Yeah.
critical minerals, technology.
All of it. Negotiations are accelerating on all those fronts, and that critical minerals angle is key to future high-tech manufacturing, especially for things like electric vehicles.
What exactly is Canada offering there?
Canada holds huge reserves of the minerals vital for the green transition: nickel, cobalt, lithium. The draft frameworks that are circulating now aim to establish secure, EU-funded supply chains for these minerals that entirely bypass U.S. markets.
So it's a dual strategic win. They counter China's dominance and ensure they have reliable, non-U.S. dependent buyers for their most strategic resources.
Exactly. And at the same time, Canada hasn't neglected the other side of the globe. They've been aggressively pursuing an Asia-Pacific diversification strategy.
While Trump was threatening tariffs globally, Canada was quietly strengthening relationships, especially with Japan, South Korea, Australia.
And this is where their pre-existing trade architecture, the CPTPP, comes into play. They're leveraging that framework, accelerating talks, and deepening agreements with those core members.
The intent here is purely survivalist.
Right, absolutely. Canadian trade officials frame it as a survival policy. The goal is to create multiple, reliable markets so that no single country,
Including the U.S.
explicitly including the U.S., can ever again use economic coercion as a weapon against Canada.
And crucially, this strategy isn't just about finding new customers. They're actively seeking new suppliers. This is the part that should really worry American manufacturing.
For generations, Canadian companies bought American products out of convenience and efficiency, but that risk calculation has been completely rewritten.
When the U.S. proves it's willing to impose 25% tariffs, despite a binding trade agreement, what message does that send to a Canadian procurement officer?
It says the risk premium for using U.S. suppliers is now astronomically high and unpredictable. European and Asian suppliers are suddenly offering competitive pricing without that constant looming political uncertainty.
And we saw the tangible result of this newfound independence back in May of 2025. Some U.S. analysts were suggesting Canada was going soft, suspending retaliatory tariffs.
And Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne immediately corrected the record, stated unequivocally that 70% of retaliatory tariffs remain firmly in place.
That is a profound statement of confidence.
It is not the behavior of a country that's afraid of economic retribution. It's the behavior of a country that has successfully diversified its interests and feels it can afford to fight back because its survival is no longer entirely dependent on the American market. And if we zoom out a bit, the most damning indictment of this whole U.S. strategy of alienating Canada came directly from the U.S. economic base itself.
They see what's happening.
They see it clearly. They recognize that the looming collapse of KUSM is not some political talking point. It is an existential threat to American jobs and industries.
And this internal alarm became deafening in early December 2025.
Right. During those mandatory U.S. trade representative hearings in Washington about renewing the deal, and these weren't just, perfunctory meetings. This was 3 full, intense days of testimony
From nearly 150 American business leaders, industry groups, trade experts.
And the consensus was just a resounding scream of desperation. Almost every single person urged the Trump administration not to destroy the agreement.
The agricultural sector, which is often a key political base for the administration, was particularly vocal.
Oh, absolutely. Take the Northwest Horticultural Council. They represent America's $13 billion apple, pear, and cherry growers.
Right.
Their vice president, Riley Bushu, testified and reminded the USTR that retaliatory tariffs during Trump's first term had already significantly damaged their exports. They've seen this movie before.
And the warning he issued was unforgettable. He used the strongest possible language. He explicitly said losing preferential access to Mexico and Canada would be an existential threat to their industry.
An existential threat. Let's just sit with that quote for a second. He said, "There are no other export market opportunities capable of offsetting the severe economic losses if we lose preferential access to Mexico and Canada."
He wasn't talking about marginal cuts. He was talking about permanent insolvency for thousands of American family farms.
Exactly. For so many U.S. agricultural products, Canada and Mexico aren't just 2 markets among many. They are the primary, most accessible, and most reliable sources of export revenue.
You can't just replace that with a market in Asia.
You can't. And the alarm bell was rung by other huge industries, too. The American Soybean Association. Their secretary, Dave Walton, warned that tariffs on steel and aluminum just increase the likelihood that soybean farmers will end up being the next target for retaliation.
Because trade wars always metastasize.
They never stay contained. But the most devastating testimony, perhaps, came from the auto industry, the very heart of North American manufacturing. The American Automotive Policy Council, representing GM, Ford, Stellantis.
They just demanded clarity?
They argued that vehicles and parts that already meet the tariff-free rules under KUSM should be exempt from any new tariffs. Their point was simple. This was the deal you negotiated.
Violating its spirit now would be a catastrophic act of self-sabotage.
And the cost calculation they presented was devastatingly specific. It turns these abstract tariff talks into real-world prices. They said the application of 25% tariffs across the supply chain is expected to add an estimated $12,000 to the price of every vehicle made in North America.
$12,000.
Per vehicle.
That single burden instantly makes American-made cars non-competitive.
Of course. The consumer now has a cheaper, untariffed option from Europe or Asia. It guarantees a massive loss of market share.
Yet, despite this unified, desperate chorus of alarm from nearly 150 industry leaders, Trump's public response was just casual dismissal.
He suggested the U.S. would either let the agreement expire or work out a different deal.
The deal he called his greatest accomplishment, he's now suggesting might just evaporate. So what does that casual suggestion letting the agreement expire, what does that actually mean for the U.S. economy?
Well, the primary concern you hear from sources within Trump's own economic circle is that he may not fully grasp the complexity or the immediate devastating nature of KUSM collapsing.
This isn't just a basic free trade pact.
No, it represents decades of restructuring where North American supply chains became completely interwoven.
Okay, let's quantify that. The 3 countries did over $1.6 trillion in trade in 2024. But as you said, it's not the volume that kills you with tariffs, it's the nature of the trade.
Exactly. This is the technical core, the supply chain disaster. Roughly half of that $1.6 trillion involves complex intermediate supply chains where parts cross the border multiple times during production.
Can you walk us through an example? Say, a part for a car assembled in Michigan.
Sure. Let's take an engine control circuit board. It might be designed in Detroit, but components sourced from Asia are sent to a plant in Ontario for etching.
Okay.
Then that component crosses into Mexico for installation into an engine block. That engine block then crosses back into the U.S., into Michigan, for final assembly. That single component has crossed the border 3, maybe 4 times?
And under USMCA, those crossings are tariff-free, as long as they meet the rules of origin.
Right. But if CUSMA expires, or if Trump's arbitrary 25% tariffs are imposed, that tax hits the component every single time it crosses the border.
Wait, so it's not one tariff, it's a stacking tariff.
It's tariff stacking. The initial 25% tariff on the circuit board entering Canada now stacks with the 25% on the engine block entering the U.S. This compounding effect is what drives up the final car price by $12,000.
And that cost has to be absorbed by the American manufacturer.
Who must either pass it on to the consumer making the car non-competitive or eat the cost, which drives them toward insolvency. The result is unavoidable. American manufacturers cannot compete globally under those conditions.
So let's talk about the calendar. July 1st, 2026. This is the mandatory review date. Why is that specific date so crucial?
It's because of the sunset clause, or poison pill, that Trump himself insisted be written into the original deal.
Right.
USMCA has a 16-year lifespan, but it includes a mandatory review after 6 years, which is July 1st, 2026. This review forces all 3 countries to affirm their commitment.
So it's not just a polite check-in. What happens if a country refuses to affirm?
Well, if a country declines, the deal doesn't immediately expire, but it begins a 10-year countdown to expiration. But crucially, that review gives any country the immediate opportunity to fundamentally change the terms or to exit the deal entirely without penalty.
Which means by July 1st, the U.S. administration has to either stabilize the relationship and recommit, or face the reality that Canada, having prepared for an exit, will be fully empowered to just walk away.
Precisely. It creates this absolute high-stakes scenario. If Trump continues his current course, he walks into that review facing a Canadian government led by Mark Carney that has spent the last year building credible structural alternatives.
Canada can walk in and credibly threaten to pull the plug.
And take $1.6 trillion in trade with them. Trump has put his greatest accomplishment onto the cliff edge, and Canada is now holding the rope ready to cut it. What's really fascinating here is that the political consequences of this breakdown extend so far beyond just American border towns and agricultural losses. We are witnessing a fundamental and I think a potentially lasting realignment of global relationships that will endure long after this administration is gone.
It really boils down to this question of the reliability factor, doesn't it?
It does.
When your closest, most critical economic partner decides you are too unreliable to depend on, and they start building international partnerships specifically designed to reduce their vulnerability to your political decisions. That is a profound strategic policy failure.
It is, and this collapse in trust fundamentally impacts global perception. Think about Europe and Asia. The lesson they're learning is that the United States, under this administration, cannot be trusted to honor its own agreements.
That it won't maintain predictable policy.
And that it won't treat long-standing allies with basic respect. And this realization, it becomes permanent international policy knowledge.
And that permanence is what distinguishes Carney's actions from simple retaliation.
Absolutely. Canada's diversification strategy is designed to structurally outlast the administration. The partnerships being built now with Europe and Asia will continue to deepen over time, regardless of who wins the next U.S. election.
Canada is successful